In this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 worst things about being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, as Business Insider just posted an article where they interviewed a bunch of drivers talking about these 3 horrible parts about being a driver. First off, there's a couple points right here that I'm going to address, especially the first one. Uber and Lyft recently reported growing revenue figures backed by high rider demand. In case you didn't know, Uber and Lyft is doing better than ever before, which I know for all my drivers right now watching this video, you're like, wait a minute, WTF, like, they're doing better than ever before, but how come I'm making less than ever before? So we're going to talk about that, right? Huge issue, and I've talked about this in a sugar honey iced tea load, if you catch my drift, amount of videos, because it's been a reoccurring theme over and over again, drivers not getting paid what they deserve. Many of the company's drivers are unsatisfied, no surprise to any drivers out there. And lastly, some drivers are frustrated by declining pay, safety concerns, and unfair deactivations. So you can hear that, like I said, Uber and Lyft recently announced they ranked in record profits and brought thousands more drivers onto their platforms. However, for many drivers, earning enough to get by has become more challenging. Business Insiders talked to dozens of ride-hailing drivers about their driving experiences. Most have said that while they value the flexibility, and I think everyone kind of values that I think being a driver is the closest thing to being your own boss without being your own boss, right? You get to just turn on the app whenever you want, you turn it off whenever you want. We all know this. It's by far, in my opinion, the best benefit of being a driver. But while they value flexibility to set their own hours, earnings have declined and competition has grown. I've talked before earlier this year, even in the end of last year, the one kind of unique issue that has kind of popped up recently has been too many drivers being on the road. And I've gotten a lot of comments of people saying, hey, Mark, I'm not going to lie now. When I go out, it's difficult to get a ride. Because with the economy, with a lot of people trying to get a secondary job, Uber and Lyft is truly, if you think about it, maybe the best secondary job to get. And with it being so easy to sign up, a lot of people are saying, hey, I need a secondary job. I need more income. Let me drive for Lyft and Uber, which makes it harder for you or any driver out there to get a ride. Sergio, who's a driver and the senior contributor to the Rideshare Guy, very famous blog and YouTube channel about ride sharing, has heard these concerns, right? He told Business Insider that complaints come from people who drive for both Uber and Lyft, but that Uber's scale has given the company an outsized impact on ride-hailing drivers. I mean, it's pretty crazy. In the second quarter of this year, of 2024, Uber drivers completed 2.2 billion trips across the company's ride-hailing and delivery platforms. Lyft drivers did about 200 million trips, right? And basically, to sum up what's going on here, both companies doing well. Right, and it's one of those things where I know for a lot of drivers watching this video, you're probably like, wait a minute, if both companies are doing so much better, why are we not doing better, right? Huge issue, right? Now, going down here, Sergio said that he's skeptical about some of the drivers' complaints. For example, the accusations that ride-hailing companies aren't giving drivers 100% of their tips. I actually agree with him on this, on the sense that I think when drivers complain, oh, we're not getting 100% of our tips, I actually don't think that's the case. I do think drivers, being honest, do get 100% of their tips. Yes, you do have to factor in things like taxes and whatnot, so that is a bit of a different angle, but it doesn't really involve Lyft and Uber per se, right? So he says, doesn't really have sufficient evidence, and I will side with that. I think that when people say, oh, I think drivers don't get 100% of their tips, I don't agree. I think they do. But, like he said, he's confident that many of the other frustrations are legitimate and widespread. And like we touched upon earlier, the big 3, the big top concerns, declining pay, driver safety, and wrongful deactivations, right? So let's go into all of this. That you look at this. Drivers have experienced a decline in earnings over the last few years. Drivers have reported being offered lower paying rides more frequently in the past years, sometimes below $3, which is insane. I didn't even know that. $3. And I've seen fewer promotions and bonuses. The trend has not been the driver's friend. In addition, on top of this, not only are drivers getting paid less per ride, but like I've mentioned in a bajillion other videos, Uber and Lyft have also taken a greater share of the rider's fare. Drivers who take home about 80% of the fare. I remember that when I first started driving years ago, and what I might call the glory days of being a rideshare driver. He said drivers, quote unquote, are lucky if they receive 50%. It's insane. I've even heard some drivers, and I've mentioned this in a bunch of other videos as well, and places like Miami saying it's almost flip-flopped. So back in the day, I'd get 80%, Lyft and Uber would get 20%. I was fine with that. So if I made $100, I'd get 80, they'd get 20. I've even heard now in some places, in like near Miami and everything, where it's almost flip-flop, where now drivers get almost close to 20% or 30%, Lyft and Uber takes away 70 or 80%. So it's like a double whammy of getting paid less per ride and getting a percentage of that ride, even taken out more than before. It's getting ridiculous, right? Uber has said that Uber's take-home rate has remained largely flat over the past few years. Okay. And that the amount of the rider fare goes towards local government tax and fees, as well as commercial auto insurance, has increased significantly. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, being honest, I think that's kind of BS because at the end of the day, regardless of how it's being distributed, all drivers care about is how much money am I bringing home? How much money do I have to make ends meet, pay bills, put food on the table, care for my family, whatever your financial goals are or uses are. At the end of the day, drivers are just not getting the amount that they were getting before. And it's getting worse, right? Lyft says drivers are guaranteed, and I did a video about this, to earn at least 70% of rider payments each week after external fees like local taxes and government-mandated insurance. Now, on one end, I like that Lyft at least said this. At least it's, some way of them trying to make things better. But on that video, I got a lot of comments, and I posted that video months ago. I got a lot of comments of people saying, you know what, Mark, I actually disagree. I think Lyft is just saying this to try to save face, because when you actually do all the math out, it doesn't look as good, especially like it says here, after external fees and local taxes, government mandated insurance, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually more of just a cop-out. They're just saying that to make it seem like they're really caring about their drivers when they actually don't. David Reisher, the CEO, who I actually am a fan of. I want to say, I actually am a fan of David Reisher, said that we've heard lots of feedback around consistent themes, earnings, deactivations, and safety, and we're taking action to address them, right? And he said that to Business Insider. And though many of the companies refute some of the findings, a UC Berkeley study, an independent study, if I'd call it that, right, from May, found that many gig drivers earn less than their area's minimum wage after accounting for expenses. And I've talked about this in so many other videos, with you getting paid less, Uber Lyft taking out a bigger cut than ever before of your actual earnings, gas going up, maintenance in your car going up, and then also the fourth one, maybe we call it like the quad threat, if I'd say that, with there being too many drivers on the road. Again, this is like the perfect storm of all these negative things all intersecting at once. And again, which I disagree with, and I think most people do too, an Uber spokesperson told Business Insider that drivers, on average, make more than $30 an hour while active in the app. The key thing, the big asterisk, is active. That's a whole other phrase in itself, or word I might say, because it's like active hours versus like total hours. It becomes a bit of a mess. And like there may be some slight truth to that, but I think that is not an exaggeration, but well, one could be, but I think two, I think they're trying to use a bit of wordplay to make it seem better. Like, oh, like $30 an hour. Oh, actually, we're active. And then it's like, well, if let's say I go out and I don't get any rides for 2 hours because there's too many drivers on the road, but I get one ride, and in that 10-minute ride, when you do all the math on the analytics, it equals about to be $30 an hour. If that 10-minute ride was extrapolated over an hour, it's very easy for Uber to say, oh, well, hey, you're making $30 an hour during active. But it's like, wait, I drove for 2 hours, though. I didn't get a ride because it's too many, you see where I'm going with this. So that's the problem. The active nature, or when companies say that, heavily skews the truth of what you're bringing home. In February, Lyft said that the typical U.S. driver who used a personal vehicle earned about $31 per engaged hour. Again, just a phrase, engaged hour, and $23 an hour after accounting for expenses like gas and maintenance. But here's the thing. Many drivers have told Business Insider that they earn less than this. And like I said, I think it's because, $23 an hour after everything. They don't mention taxes on this, so keep that in mind too. But obviously, everyone has to pay taxes. So that's not Uber and Lyft's fault. Might as well say that. But $23 an hour. But then that's also, again, quote unquote, during engaged hours or active hours or whatever. What does that really come out to when you talk about everything? Not good, right? They have a few different situations here. That he made $109K. This one driver, George. But only took about $17K after Uber's commission, gas, and maintenance fees. Like, wow. I mean, that's ridiculous. He said he had to work nearly double the hours to make the same amount in a week he made last year. Again, this is a reoccurring theme that I've mentioned in so many videos that things have gotten worse. Now, I do think things might get better. And I mentioned this a couple weeks ago in a video where I feel like right now we're in the dark era of Uber and Lyft. And I feel like things are slowly getting better. I do feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I do want to say that. But there is also no denying it that in the past, as you see, year, things have gotten worse for a lot of drivers, and I think there's a lot of different reasons why. And a lot of drivers are screaming, like, wait a minute, if Uber and Lyft is doing better than ever before financially, and with all these analytics and numbers and stocks and blah, 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 how come drivers are doing worse than ever before, right? And I think it's an incredibly valid question. In addition, drivers also reported lower or more inconsistent tips over the past year. UC Berkeley has found that customers were 3 times as likely to tip delivery drivers as rideshare drivers. I think the main reason why, if you want me to be honest, or I think it's a couple different things. One, you typically tip your delivery driver before it happens. So you don't want someone to mess with your food. I'm being honest. I think it's almost like the negative consequences of not tipping scares people, so they tip anyway. The second thing is the social pressure. If your delivery driver comes to your door and you did not tip them, you're going to get confronted. If, let's say, you zero somebody at a bar, meaning you don't tip at all at a bar, the bartender might confront you. It's the same with the waiter. But with an Uber and Lyft, you can easily leave, not tip them, no big deal, right? I think that's an issue. Uber has told Business Insider that tipping frequency and average tip size have both roughly doubled over the last 4 years. Again, I think that's a bit biased, and I think they're very skewed, and I think it's a bit misleading because 4 years. 4 years ago was 2020, at least at the time of this video, right? So, yeah, people are probably tipping more now than during the pandemic. That makes logical sense, right? But when you look at maybe in the past year or two, tips have gone down, right? So that's the first point. Drivers are making way less than ever before. Now getting into the second thing, worrying about safety, right? Now the day goes by that we don't hear about some carjacking of Uber or Lyft drivers or unfortunately physical assaults. I remember, this was years ago. I don't think this is as much of an issue anymore. Let me know what you think in the comments though, where I remember a lot of Uber and Lyft drivers were getting their cars messed with, for lack of a better phrase or word, because they had Uber and Lyft on it, and taxi drivers were attacking their cars. I don't know if that's the case anymore. I feel like the whole taxi versus Uber and Lyft thing still is always going to be something as a debate, but I don't think it's as aggressive and as intense as it used to be. But again, you never know, right? That's just one example. Julie, a part-time driver in Cleveland, hasn't always felt safe during her last 5 years in the gig economy. Some riders have threatened her, damaged her vehicle, or encouraged her to speed. Due to her safety concerns, Julie says she only drives during the daytime, and that's a big thing, right? That safety, especially I know for a lot of women drivers, there's a lot of things they have to deal with, especially things like sexual assault. There's more and more cases. I will say, when you look at all the data, and I mentioned this before, and I think it's important to look at the numbers. You hear more about these cases, right? But the issue is, remember that the more rides that happen, the more of these that are kind of inevitable. So even if they say, look, there were 10,000 assault cases last year, that it's getting worse. It's not that it's getting worse. It's just there's so many more rides that's happening every day, which equals more and more cases, right? It's an unfortunate, inevitable thing about being a driver that there are horrible riders. There's a lot of amazing riders out there, but there's also a lot of horrible ones, right? And, you know, you can see right here, one of the worst experiences came when a customer who appeared to be unwell rolled down the windows and the others being kidnapped. He kept telling me he killed many people. I mean, I can't even imagine being in her shoes with this. You know, I reported to Uber and nothing was done. And that's another issue. Uber seems to do this thing, and Lyft too. I think maybe Lyft is a little bit better with this. I can't say exactly, to be honest. Where if a rider does something horrible, Uber's like, well, no big deal. But if a driver gets a minor report, boom, they get deactivated, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's a big issue. Somehow, Uber and Lyft will almost always take the passenger side more times than the driver's side. This is why I suggest, if you do have an incident with, like, say, a passenger, I just did a video about how to contact Lyft support in the Lyft driver app. If you have an incident, I like to call it first contact them first. Say, look, I don't know if something's going to happen, but I just want to let you know what happened right away. That way, you're not coming after me, and now you have to get defensive, being like, oh, no, like, they did this, and so he said this, but she said this situation. Again, it's very frustrating, right? And Uber does say, and this is true, they have a lot of, and this is what they're mentioning here, a lot of safety features now. And I do think and I will say that, I think the features that Uber has rolled out, in addition to Lyft, although I think Uber probably has the edge over Lyft if I had to pick one, is a lot better. There are now more features than ever before within Uber and Lyft to make it safer for drivers and also passengers. And I do think that's good. There's no denying that, right? A Lyft spokesperson told Business Insider that the company has an around-the-clock safety response team. They can be contacted via phone or chat, a trauma-informed care team with specialized training, and a location-sharing option drivers can use to ensure loved ones know where they are, right? So both Lyft and Uber has this. They have a bunch of stuff here, another big paragraph. I do think Uber has the edge over safety features. If I had to pick one, I have no affiliation with Uber and Lyft, by the way. Clearly, because I usually roast them in a lot of these videos, but I do think they credit where credit's due. There's a lot of good Uber and Lyft has done. There's no denying that. There's also a lot of bad, you know. But moving on to the bad, continuing on with the third thing that really just is getting worse, and I can see this from numerous different angles, is deactivation, right? Many drivers have been wrongfully deactivated from the Uber platform. When drivers try to contact Uber to discuss their deactivations or other issues, the company's driver support systems and agents are also unhelpful. Drivers can be activated for various reasons, including a low platform rating, failed background check, expired license, and customer accusations of safety issues, but drivers are sometimes deactivated due to fraudulent rider claims. This is something I've talked about in a bajillion videos. And the reason why is this happens a lot. I hear this all the time, even in comments on this channel, where like say someone's driving, a passenger is drunk, and they're just complaining about God knows what. And the driver's, you're just trying to drive, you're just like, hey, like, I'm just gonna drop them off and go home, like, blah, blah. And then the passenger turns around and says, hey, I'm gonna contact Uber and I'm gonna make something up that my driver was drunk. And then Uber says, oh, you got a drunk driver, they deactivate your account. You don't drive for a week. Uber investigates it. They come back to you and say, hey, you know what, we're sorry. We realized they actually made it up. They admitted it, or maybe they didn't, whatever. You're good to drive. And on one end, you're like, okay, great, but you just missed out on a week's worth of work. But two, now you almost always have this like anxiety in the back of your head of like, oh shoot, is it going to happen again? When am I going to get wrongfully deactivated again? When am I going to turn on the app when I'm relying on this income and I just get an alert saying, hey, sorry, you can't drive, you're being investigated, right? You can see right here that one driver, Aaron, who drives in Colorado, told Business Insider that he was deactivated from the Uber app for 3 days after a customer filed a complaint saying that his appearance and smell made them suspect he was intoxicated, like I just said, right? And here's the issue. And again, to look at both sides, there are some drivers who have been caught driving drunk. So this is not something that's like completely far-fetched. I mean, although it's rare, there are Uber and Lyft drivers who have been intoxicated, who have actually gotten issues, because there are bad drivers out there. There's a lot of amazing drivers, but there's also some bad drivers, and it's this odd gray area, because I do kind of get why Uber and Lyft says, hey, if a driver is potentially driving drunk, they should not continue driving. So I do agree with Uber and Lyft about that. How do you go about it, though? That's what gets tricky, right? You can see here that he was eventually cleared by Uber following a brief investigation and had his account reactivated. But stories of permanent deactivation do scare me and make me not want to rely solely on this job. Like I said, it's this odd anxiety in the back of your head every day now when you drive, once this happens, that you're like, if I drive another person, I'm going to have a minor dispute. Is this person going to report me? Are they going to make something up? Is this going to be deja vu of what just happened before? Some drivers have a hard time getting their deactivations reversed, right? An Uber's driver in Oregon was making a delivery when the customer changed the drop-off location. The new destination turned into a 10-minute trip into a 1-hour one. So, bit of a difference. So he contacted Uber Eats support to try to cancel the order. He said the support agent approved the cancellation, but then a few days later, his account was deactivated. All of a sudden, it says my account is under investigation for fraud. It just says fraud. It does not give any details. After 2 months, now imagine relying on driving for Uber Eats, and this is how you make your income. After 2 months of exchanging messages with agents, he says his account was eventually reactivated. But, you know, it's like, imagine that. Imagine being deactivated for 2 months. Would you even want to drive or work for Uber Eats again when you're like, hey, I did like doing this. It was great money. I liked all the benefits of being a delivery driver. But when is this going to happen again? When they clearly did nothing wrong. Now, I did do a video about this, but we're going to touch upon, I think it was earlier this year, I believe, that an Uber spokesperson, this is true, it was last year. They told Business Insider that the company announced major changes to its deactivation process to make it more fair to drivers. This is true. This includes giving them, quote unquote, a clear process to appeal a deactivation and protecting them from false allegations and unfair ratings. They have a dedicated support team for safety-related issues. There's always some things that they can do. In addition, Lyft also rolled out some stuff that allows them to appeal deactivation issues. And it's interesting, you know, going off that last point I just made, I feel like wrongful deactivations weren't even a thing years ago. Unless you did something super messed up, like say you're just a horrible driver, like, okay, like you kind of deserve to maybe get deactivated or maybe even fired, if I use that strong term. Now, though, it's even more common. And I think these three issues, like I said, not getting paid enough, safety, and wrongful deactivations are just this big triple threat. And I might even include a fourth one, being honest, there being just too many drivers on the road. Although you could look at too many drivers being on the road as almost like a subsect of getting paid less, just because, of course, the more drivers that are on the road, there's only a finite amount of rides to go around, and you might just not get that roll of the dice. And I have gotten a lot of comments on this channel of people being like, yeah, you know, I have been driving for years. Like I showed you in this one example on Business Insider, that one driver said, yeah, you know, I had to drive double this year to make exactly what I made last year. That is insane. Now, I do think things are getting better. I will say that. I know a lot of drivers are like, no, Mark, I disagree. I feel like that with all these negative things happening, there is at least now a light being shed on this topic. And there's a lot more articles now being posted by so many different news outlets talking about how bad things are for drivers. In addition, as you saw from this one study, like I said, UC Berkeley, that they were saying, look, Uber and Lyft said this, but when we did an actual independent study looking at all the analytics and we have no dog in the race, we're trying to be objective, they're like, no, actually Uber and Lyft is wrong. So not only is there being more light being shed on the negativity that's going around with being a driver, but also there are different entities that are independent of Uber and Lyft conducting their own research and realizing, hey, actually, Uber and Lyft's wrong. Like, things are pretty bad for drivers. Like I talked about as well earlier this year, what happened in Massachusetts, and one auditor found, after doing independent research, that Uber and Lyft owed Massachusetts, the state, hundreds of millions of dollars. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So I do think there are moves being made to make things better for drivers. And like I said, I think in the past year or two, and it has been almost like the dark era where things have gotten worse and worse and worse. And again, I've talked about this in too many videos to count, right? Because it's tricky. And like I've said a lot, not to sound like a broken record, I do want to keep people updated about what's going on with Uber and Lyft, right? On this channel, of course, I do a variety of different videos. A lot of ride-sharing ones. I talk about things in the gig economy. I do a lot of accounting videos and business videos. I've done videos about interviewing, getting a job. I've done resume reviews, that kind of stuff, right? So this channel, is a bit of like a variety channel. But for this video, it is a reoccurring theme. I mean, I can't even think about the amount of videos that I've done where I've reviewed an article that just came out. This just came out, at least at the time of this video, where I have reviewed an article that just reiterates again and again, oh yeah, things are bad for drivers, right? And I do think hopefully things do get better. But again, these are the things that I think need to be addressed, because I think what this article really does highlight, and I kind of like how it did it, even though it was a bit of a lengthy article, but I really wanted to go through it, is I think it kind of highlighted this aspect that Uber and Lyft says one thing, and then when you actually look at the facts, the statistics, the numbers, whether it's anecdotal, given drivers that have been interviewed, whether it's conducted by a third party like UC Berkeley, whether it's a professional, like an auditor, for example, although that wasn't mentioned in this article, but the auditor, when you look at people who are not involved with Lyft and Uber, when they conduct their own research, almost 100% of the time, it comes back of them saying, actually, no, Uber and Lyft's wrong. Drivers are getting paid way worse than before. Drivers are getting deactivated way more than Uber and Lyft is saying, et cetera, et cetera. Especially when you look at the pay, which to me, I think for most drivers is probably like the biggest thing. That's why it was addressed first on this article, is how much you're getting paid, and they're getting paid less, dealing with expenses. And when you look at all of that, I mean, Uber and Lyft's main argument, I think, a lot of the times is, like I said, the active hours, or the, I can't remember what phrase Lyft used, it wasn't active. I can't remember what they called it, right? But it was basically the same word, right? Tomato, tomato at that point, semantics. But that's the issue, right? Is Uber and Lyft tries to argue that. And like I said, if I go out, let's say, and I go to drive for 2 hours, and because, like, say, I'm in a bit of a smaller city or a smaller area, and like, say, there's too many drivers on the road, and I only get one ride in those 2 hours that's 10 minutes long. If you use some math techniques, if I'd even call it that, you could say, hey, well, you're making $30 an hour as active hours. But then it's like, no. Yeah, it's easy to say that, because if you look at that 10-minute period and you do the math out and blah, blah, it comes out to be about $30 in terms of active hours. You're like, wait, but I was active as in working for 2 hours, but I only actually worked as a driver for 10 minutes. And I think that is a bit of a trick that I've seen Uber and Lyft use a lot. I think it's tough, because I think what's interesting about this, just from my angle, is I know Uber and Lyft knows this is an issue. And I do think they are trying to help. I mean, I want to give credit where credit's due. I do like David Reacher. I know some people like him. I know some people don't. I do think he did pull Lyft out of a deep, dark hole, and I think I give him a lot of credit. I'm not a fan of everything he's doing, right? But I am a fan of him nonetheless. I do think he's at least trying, right? And it is this kind of tricky situation when you're dealing with companies, and I know we probably all think this for a lot of different reasons, not just with ride sharing, that some companies will do something nice. And a lot of people say, well, are they like donating to this charity or doing something nice because they genuinely want to help? Or are they just trying to look nice in the public eye? Are they just trying to save face, so to speak? And with Uber and Lyft, you could argue on both sides, right? Because Uber and Lyft, I think, to an extent, you could argue, are they trying because they genuinely want to make things better for drivers? Or are they just doing this because now, if you think about it, there is now a lot of negative attention upon Uber and Lyft, more than ever before. There's more and more articles now coming out. There's more and more states now going after Uber and Lyft, like Massachusetts did. What's going on in Minneapolis? What happened here in California? There's what happened in New York, for example, as well. Like, so a lot of states now are kind of looking into this a lot more intensely. A lot of lawmakers and legislation, like I've talked about in other videos. So things are moving. Things are moving slower than I like for all my drivers out there, but things are at least moving. But at least now, which is kind of unfortunate, even though I do think things might get better, these are the three big issues that drivers are still facing and will continue to face. What is the solution? What is the best way to overcome it? Generally, I don't know. I mean, obviously, you could easily say, we'll pay them more. You could easily say, make things safer. But doing that in practicality is a bit trickier. It's a huge issue for drivers, and for all my drivers out there too, are there any other things that you feel like you deal with that this article did not address? Of course, these big three, I think, are the biggest three. Pay, safety, wrongful deactivation, or just deactivation in general. But are there any other issues that you personally deal with? Because being honest, when you look at everything, this, in my opinion, just kind of scrapes the iceberg of what all this negative stuff, all this kind of negative stuff that exists, and all the negative things that drivers have to deal with.